It was unprecedented. The paper concerned had to carry a message of apology on the street posters. It was a totally new thing, and media history was written.
When the Press Council printed allegations of his involvement in a spy tape saga, Ronnie Kasrils, a former Minister of Intelligence, decided to test the effectiveness of the Press Council's adjudicatory arm, consisting of the Public Advocate, the Ombudsman and the Appeals Panel. Mr. Kasrils felt that the newspaper had treated him unfairly. The Press Council is a co-regulatory body that evolved after South Africa's transition to democracy, a transition in which the print media played an important part.
We come from a past where there was apartheid, there was oppression, there was fascism in the country, and people were not allowed to express themselves. And as a result, people sought freedom, and they fought for freedom. And the media was very much a part of that fight for freedom.
After the struggle for freedom was won, it became clear that the print media would continue their fight, this time to protect democracy.
The government feels very embarrassed at that very robust media and very vibrant media and very questioning media. It believes very strongly in holding the government to account, which is, of course, the basis of a democracy.
Government wanted to press for the introduction of a statutory tribunal, which the government reasoned was necessary in order to make sure that the public are protected against what they saw as some intrusion by the media.
This soon led to an uneasy relationship between the media on the one hand and the government and the ruling ANC on the other. Anti-media voices started clamoring for control over the media through a statutory media appeals tribunal.
With the climate between the press and the government deteriorating, one doesn't know what the ANC may come up with.
The press and the Press Council responded to these critics by strengthening their structures, shifting from a system of self-regulation to one of independent co-regulation, and strengthening their adjudication processes. The changes paid off, and the voices calling for government control of the media have receded.
One of the reasons, I think, why the ANC withdrew the Media Appeals Tribunal, put it on the back burner, because they felt that, in fact, the Press Council had beefed up its sanctions procedures.
When an abuse or a mistake or a misjudgment has happened in the media, complainants complain to the Press Ombudsman, and the Press Ombudsman will deal with that matter in a very expeditious fashion. And editors of newspapers respect the Press Council.
Getting stories right is it. It has to be. We can't have a trust relationship with our readers if we get things wrong. We can't expect people to buy City Press or whichever newspaper if you consistently don't check your facts. We're in the business of selling papers. If we screw it up, that's us, done.
I'm responsible for everything that goes in the first 16 pages of the paper, whether it be news, investigations, features and packages, as well as front page leads. So obviously accuracy is an incredibly important part of my job.
Yes, mistakes slip in. No one is perfect, but we try really, really hard, and we build in layers and layers of checking so that mistakes don't slip in.
I was aggrieved by the manner of reporting of a particular story about spy tapes. I could have gone for litigation. That's going to the civil courts, takes a huge amount of time and cost. But I knew of the Press Council and a way of dealing with complaints of my kind. And I actually decided that I would approach the Press Council in respect of my specific complaint.
The public advocate, who in fact is the fulcrum of our work, is the one who receives the complaints, is the champion of the complainant.
It's often quite clear when there's a breach of the press code. And when there is, I will take the complaint, lodge it with the editor, and they have 7 working days within which to respond. They then respond, and if we can achieve an amicable resolution, they will either publish a correction, they will give the person a right of reply or apologize. And that is how the complaint is then resolved.
Once the public advocate hands it over to me, it takes an average of 1 or 2 days to come to the finding. Whatever I decide, they can appeal. Appeals are about 10% of my findings.
If any one of the parties are not satisfied, then they can make application to me as the chairperson of the appeals panel, make an application for leave to appeal to the appeals panel, and if I grant that application, then the matter would be heard by the appeals panel.
Despite its successes, many continue to criticize the Press Council, alleging it was biased in favor of the press. But researchers have now dispelled these doubts.
One of the main complaints and criticism against the Press Council was that the Ombudsman would generally rule in favour of the press and the newspaper and generally rule against the complainant. A newspaper would publish a pack of lies on the front page, and it's a big splash on the front page of the newspaper, terrible headline and so on. And then the Ombudsman would tell the newspaper to publish an apology, and they would bury that apology on page 15 or 17 where no one was going to see it. But in each year that we looked at, in the periods between 2009 and 2014, each and every year, the Ombudsman would rule in favour of the complainant the largest majority of the time, which really says to us that, that criticism that the Ombudsman is biased in favour of the media sort of dispels that myth a little bit. The Ombudsman and the Press Council has started to specify the prominence of the publication of rulings and apologies and corrections. And generally what he does is that he insists that the prominence of the ruling has to be suitable to the prominence of the offending article. We also found happily that publications and newspapers in South Africa have a 100% compliance rate to this over the past 2 years.
The Press Council has also proved that it isn't scared of setting precedents in its sanctions. In the case of Ronnie Kasrils, it made history.
For the first time in the history of this country, a publication was ordered to put up a poster apologizing to a complainant.
What it does is that it tells the public that these people cannot behave like cowboys, that editors are not the end and be all, that we can actually bring them down and hold them to account.
So I'm a great fan of the Press Council and of its code, and I'm very proud that my case has helped now to clarify certain aspects and to develop the code further in relation to the aggrieved party's right.
We have on the Press Council extremely competent and erudite people who make an enormous contribution. As far as the Ombudsman section of the Press Council is concerned, I have no doubt that it's working perfectly and doing a public service.
The amusing thing is that even people who've got complaints against the municipality, against their cell phone companies, actually write to us, and we then have to say to them, sorry, you are knocking at the wrong door.